This is a meaty conversation. So tonight, if all you want is to swim around in the shallow flatlands of your traditional spiritual experience, you don't want anything to do with this conversation, because we have a prophetic voice with us tonight whose experience and depth of knowledge is truly unique. His ministry is an oasis in the middle of the desert, and we're going to be talking about where is America in Bible prophecy? And the answer is going to shock you. He is the senior pastor of Influence Church. He's been seen in the Washington Post, the New York Times, Fox News, CNN, the History Channel. He's spoken before Congress. He's an advisor to people of influence across the globe. And we're so excited to have with us Pastor Phil Hotsenpiller. Pastor Phil, I can't tell you how excited we are to have you on Encounter today.
Well, I am thrilled to be with you, and as a new friend and a new colleague in the same endeavor, really trying to make the world a better place, lift up the name of the Lord, and preserve what we have left of this nation, and bring it to a new level again. I just commend you for your work.
Oh, thank you. It's, as we've been talking, it's interesting how our values are kind of our mission aligns. And you're so far ahead of us in many ways. And it's so refreshing to find someone who's out there doing the work, blazing the trail, digging up the fallow ground, even with news. Tell us a little bit about what you have there behind you on the LED wall and what you guys do as far as news is concerned.
Well, we live in California, the land of the fruit and the nuts. And arguably we have the worst governor in America. I'm sure other states might want to debate me on that one, but we certainly are in the top 2 or 3. And so during the pandemic, it only took us a couple of weeks to realize something was amiss. And we decided to open our church up and defy governmental orders. It was the greatest thing we ever did. But one of the things we also did was start a news media outlet called AmericanFaith.com. And at first it was kind of just kind of basic, didn't know what we were doing, didn't have a lot of direction. I don't have a background in that at all. But then it kind of started to turn when we hired our first journalists, then we hired a second, a third, a fourth. And next thing you know, we're producing 35 to 40 original stories every day. We have about 22 million people on it, and it has really become something really powerful. We're adding different dimensions into it. We were banned from Facebook and Instagram in terms of paid within probably the first week of our start. We were pretty aggressive, and we weren't taken off. So we've had to grow, like our Instagram has grown completely organic in 2 years up to over 100,000, which is pretty exciting given what we've had to work with. And now we've added influencers, young influencers. They'll be starting May 1st. So we find people that are have the same message as us, but they're in their 20s. They have at least a following of 35,000 people. And so we brought on 3 of those. They'll be launching here this month. So we're always trying to take some new initiatives. We've also partnered with Pacific Justice Institute, if you're familiar with them. They're the largest in terms of manpower law group that represents people all across the nation. They have over 900 attorneys. We've partnered with them, and we're going to be producing something called Lex Rex. And if you know that was the book that was written in the Revolution, that law is king, the king is not law. And so that's going to be a really interesting thing. So if you have a constitutional issue, after you go in and kind of go through our platform, then you just click a button and they will represent you for $1.
Wow.
And so if that's a constitutional issue, we've got you covered on that. We also have We the People. It's a video series. We'll be releasing that this week. 10-part series designed for Gen Z, try to get the message out of what is the Constitution, how do I understand it, why is it important in my life?
Do you work with wall builders at all on that? Because it seems like you guys align very much.
We haven't. We really haven't had, I hate to say it, we haven't had much chance to work with anybody. We run so many things here. Just to kind of get one thing off the air and try to make it work for us is great. But we definitely engage with a lot of people and love what Wall Builders is doing and others are doing as well.
Well, we're going to put a link in the description for this, so we want everybody to go take a look at this and make it a part of your daily routine. Going and checking the news, might as well get it from faith-filled sources. And I've been really blessed to see someone like yourself who's so focused on current events and what's happening in the news, to also bring a very clear, concise, and grounded scripturally understanding of Bible prophecy, which you've done in this amazing new book, It's Midnight in America. And one of the things you address, and I want to dive right into this, is America in Bible prophecy. And there's often this discussion on, is America economic Babylon? Is it spiritual Babylon? Is it actual Babylon? You took a different approach and a different look at where we can find America, particularly in the Old Testament. Talk to us about America in Bible prophecy.
Well, I've been frustrated, as many people have. If you try to find the answer to that question, you usually get one of two answers. Either number one, it's not, and then they'll give you multiple reasons why it's not, or it is, and they'll give you an obscure verse in Ezekiel 38:13, one of the daughters of Phoenicia. And I really never liked either one of those answers. So I took a different approach. I said, let me try to go original here, whether I hit the ball or not. And so I started looking at it differently, and I said, what are some things that are happening in our world that are unusual? And I think the whole J6 thing kind of brought everyone's attention to, why is there not due process happening in D.C. when it happens in other places and seems to be pretty effective? And I really started looking at it because it's a city-state and it operates with a different set of guidelines than the states do. We call it a District of Columbia, but it really is a city-state along with two other city-states in the world. So let me kind of go into that with some depth and not give away the entire farm here in the process. So that way you go, I got to get the book. But
yeah, because we're going to get into the prophecy of the three cities here in a little bit.
Do you want me to just jump in now?
We can. Listen, our audience is ready. They're ready to go.
All right, so if you've been to D.C. or you've seen pictures of it, you've seen the Washington Monument. And if you've ever seen it, you look at it and you go, it doesn't look anything like George Washington. In fact, you see this 555-foot, which is really an interesting height, 555-foot high monument that is an exact replica of the Egyptian obelisk dedicated to the sun god. Mm-hmm. And you wonder, why do we have an obelisk dedicated in the name of George Washington in Washington, D.C. as a centerpiece of our nation's capital? So then you hop on a plane, you fly down to Vatican, and you get into Vatican, you walk in, and then you see another Egyptian obelisk. This one was moved there in the 13th century by order of the Pope and considered to be really one of the spiritual centers of the Roman Catholic Church, which is again unusual. Why an obelisk dedicated to the sun god of Egypt? So then we hop on a plane, we fly over to London Incorporated. A lot of people aren't familiar with London Incorporated, but it's a 1 square mile area that really is the financial center of the world. They have their own governor, they have their own laws, they have their own police, everything just like D.C. and Vatican, and they operate very differently. But they also have an obelisk. This one moved there. It's called Cleopatra's Needle, and it is an Egyptian obelisk dedicated to the sun god. So they have commonality in many, many ways. Commonality in there's only 3 city-states in the world. Commonality with the obelisk. Commonality with they operate differently than the country they exist in. Some have currency, some have money. But then if you look at the flag for Washington, D.C., it actually has 3 stars on it. And if you try to look that up and come to some conclusion what it means, you don't really ever get a great answer. And my answer is it represents the 3 city-states. So what's the big deal? Why does that even make a difference? Well, if you study your Bible, you go back to the book of Genesis, chapter 10 and 11, you meet a man by the name of Nimrod. And Nimrod was a type or a picture of the coming Antichrist. He built a tower, very interesting, and God confused the language, if you remember, and he founded the first human kingdom. It was called Babylon. So Babylon, as the first human kingdom, was more than just a geographical location. Babylon is also a mindset and a spiritual entity. So we see Babylon thinking running from really Genesis into the book of Revelation, where you see Babylon is finally judged. She's called the Great Whore, Mystery Babylon, the Great Whore. One of the things you note that's interesting is a 7-headed beast. On the back of that beast is a woman holding a chalice. And it says that the chalice is filled with the blood of the saints. Well, I believe it was Pope Leo XIII that minted a coin, a Vatican coin, and on the back of it, it had a 7-headed beast with a woman with a chalice. So you see a lot of parallels happening here that are interesting. But it says that when God judges Mystery Babylon, that he breaks her back into three parts. So you know that these three parts, whatever they are, have come together at some point prior to chapter 17 of Revelation. We assume during the reign of the Antichrist, during that 7-year tribulation period, though it could be earlier. And it kind of, for me, it made sense because all of a sudden I realized D.C. is really the military center of the world. Vatican is the religious center of the world. And then you've got London, really is the financial center. So if you're a despotic ruler, what you want is you want military, you want religion, and you want money all coming together at the same time.
So that's how the Antichrist kingdom will come together, be a worldwide Babylonian system, and America plays a part in that worldwide system.
Absolutely. And I go into some more detail in that. So, but that's kind of the big picture. And again, you go back to, we're all kind of trying to understand prophecy. They might call me an expert and they call me an amateur. It doesn't matter. We're all on the same journey. We're reading it. We're saying, God, give me eyes to see this through your eyes, and give me an understanding of culture so that I can make sense of it as I go down through history.
Well, one of the interesting parallels that you also draw with America is in regard to Samson, that I thought was fascinating. And by the way, that whole thing that you just unpacked, those of you that are watching, you can tell there's a lot more meat in that, and he lays it out in the book in detail. And I'm telling you, I've never heard it explained quite like that, which leads to the whole book sheds new light on different aspects of Bible prophecy, particularly Samson. Can you talk to us a little bit about that parallel?
Well, most people know the story of Samson. It's found in the book of Judges. And this was a dark period in the history of Israel. In fact, the last chapter, last verse ends with, there was no king in Israel, and every man did that which was right in his own eye. So Samson, the key to his strength was his covenant with God. He had a Nazirite vow that he had taken, and one of the things that was critical for that was a razor would never touch his head. In other words, his hair was never cut. And he found himself in a compromising situation with Delilah, and as he revealed to her the power was in his hair. And while he was sleeping, she had his hair cut. And then it says he stood up to go out as he had before, not knowing that the power had gone out from him. And then they gouged out his eyes so he couldn't see. And I looked at it and I said, this is America. It's Samson. We have broke covenant with God. We've committed a national sin, and our strength is gone, but we're going to go out like we have before, as if we had all of the blessings of God on us. And we also have been blinded. We can't even see the futility and the disaster that's all around us on every day. I can't even imagine a time in my life when I'd look forward and think I would see what I see in America today. But here's the beautiful thing about Samson. So Samson then is chained and taken down to Gaza. And that might be interesting because Gaza's in the news. And this is a really interesting connection.
Yeah.
So they take him down to Gaza because that's where the temple of the Philistines were, and they worshipped a god Dagon. And it says he spoke to the young boy and he said, put my hands on the pillars. And the Holy Spirit just includes a little phrase in that account, and it says, and his hair began to grow. Now, there's no reason for that to be in there, except that it's a reminder that the covenant had been renewed by Samson.
Wow.
And then it says that he killed more Philistines in his dying than he ever did in his living. And so I really believe that while America's committed a national sin, while America is far from God and blind in many ways, powerless, I really believe that we can renew a covenant. I believe we can come back to God, and I believe that's in God's heart. Now, prophetically, Babylon is going to happen. We know that somewhere down the road, I'm not a predictor of day and time. I can say, is it in 5 years or in 500 years? I don't know. That's really not my purpose. My purpose is to try to say, let's interpret what we know. Let's try to make sense of it and move forward. The other thing that's really interesting, I'll kind of pause here, but I'd like to come back to the Gaza story in a few minutes if we could.
Yeah, absolutely, because America's facing so many enemies around the world. We need to be able to shake ourselves one more time if we're going to see one last thrust of the Great Commission throughout the whole wide world before the Antichrist agenda really does take hold, and we've got so many enemies. In a moment, we'll talk about China, which you lay out in the book, China and Bible Prophecy. But yeah, dig first into that parallel, which is so fascinating, with Samson and Gaza and what's happening with the war in Palestine right now.
So we're very familiar with what happened in October, and then what happened thereafter. This horrible war and battle where many innocent people have been killed. And I always say that war is always bad, so never rejoice in war. My dad was a colonel in the Army and had 7 battle stars and won the bronze medal 3 different times. So, he never thought well of war, even though he was a warrior and a leader of men. But what makes it interesting is that it was Gaza, and that's tied into a lot of biblical truth. What a lot of people didn't expect, in fact, the CBS reporter that broke this news, and so you can see the shock on his face when he's reporting this, but one of the Hamas soldiers, when asked by the CBS reporter, why did you attack this settlement? What was this all about? And he said the primary reason was the red cows.
That's right.
And you can only imagine what happened. I mean, just the average Christian said, yeah, they attacked because of the red cows. And you don't even know what that means. But we see in biblical prophecy, and this is probably one of the hottest things right now in biblical prophecy, is the return of the red heifer.
Yes.
So the red heifer, which this may not mean much to many people, but in Numbers chapter 19, it records that the red heifer was necessary, the sacrifice, and then the burning down to the ashes where they're white, and then mixed with water to make the living water for the purification of the temple and the priests. There have been 9 red heifers sacrificed in the history of Israel since the Solomon's temple. Maimonides, which is a 12th century rabbi, probably one of the most respected, said when the 10th heifer is sacrificed, the Messiah will return. Well, lo and behold, a Texas rancher, leave it to Texas, come up with some red heifers, said, I believe I have 5, and they inspected them, and then in September of 22, they transported them to Israel. They've been in isolation. They've been further inspected, and they had a conference with Jewish rabbis in March of this year where they verified these indeed fit the requirement, the minimum requirement for being a sacrificial calf and the purification of the people. Now, the reason the Hamas fighter said what he said, because he knows very well that Israel already has 500 trained priests, DNA verified Levi, from the tribe of Levi. They've already selected a high priest. They've already built all the utensils that go in the temple. With now this, the only thing remaining left is the rebuilding of the temple on the Temple Mount. And the mosque is there, and it has to move in order for that temple to be built. So he knew that this was really an act of war in the sense that the mosque will be moved somewhere down the road.
Now, I got to ask you this because I've been to Israel multiple times myself and talking with people. There's been some discussion as to whether the location of the original temple is actually where the mosque was. I wanted to get your opinion on this. Some say it's just enough over that it's on currently Jewish land. They could build it right next to the current mosque or even further over, but next to or by the city of David. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I'm going to take you back to another prophecy that has yet to be fulfilled, but I think we're very close. And that's the one in Ezekiel 38 and 39. And this says there's a coalition of forces that come up against Israel in the latter days. This is not Armageddon. This is very different. Armageddon is every nation of the earth, and it culminates with the return of Christ. So this one's very different. But this coalition of forces come in, and they have very strange ancient names like Gog and Magog and Persia and Gomer and Togarmah, even Ethiopia, which is Ethiopia of the north. And they come in and they're soundly defeated. In fact, so soundly are they defeated that 4/5 of all their soldiers die in this battle. It records that it takes 7 years to clean the land. And that means not just pick up the war, it means to purify the land. Okay,
yes.
So there's something happening. Why does the land even need to be purified during that time? So it says there, and this is another one of those things. Remember, the words of the Lord are pure words, as silver refined in a furnace 7 times. So it doesn't. The Bible in whole is pure, but that Proverbs chapter 30 says every single word is pure. So when God says that when this happens, every wall in Jerusalem will fall, it doesn't say some walls. It says every wall will fall. I believe that the walls that are holding up the Temple Mount will give way, that the mosque will slide down to the Kidron Valley, that'll be the signal for the Antichrist to come in. It'll be perfect because 4/5 of the armies largely are either ethnically tied to Islam or they're Islamic fighters. When you think about those ancient names, that would be Russia, that would be Iran, that would be Germany, that would be Togarmah, and that would be Saudi Arabia. So those are all tied back at least one way or another to that. So the Antichrist comes in. He's the man of peace. He's really the Antichrist, but he comes in as a man of peace. And he signs a 7-year covenant with Israel. And one of the covenant pieces is you can build the temple now. The mosque is gone. The soldiers are gone that would defend this, and you can build the temple. So he sends that. And then what happens halfway through, 2 Thessalonians 2 records this. It says that he will take his seat in the temple of God and declare himself to be God. Well, we know there has to be a temple for him to set in the temple of God and declare himself to be God. We think the corollary passage is Revelation chapter 13, where the Antichrist comes. He demands worship and then institutes the mark of the beast, and that begins the great tribulation that Jesus referred to in Matthew chapter 24.
Wow. It is becoming a more and more prominent concept that this Gog and Magog war will happen actually at the beginning or just before the Great Tribulation, which kind of kicks it all off, and it certainly makes perfect biblical sense for that to be the case. But there are other enemies also that are on the horizon that you talk about, China being one of them, the kings of the East. Where is China in Bible prophecy? And we're seeing them now in the news so much.
Yeah, well, again, the Bible is always written for our instruction, right? So if you go back to the book of Genesis, you find that Abraham had to rescue his cousin Lot from the kings of the east. They had crossed the Euphrates River. They had trapped him down below the Salt Sea, the Dead Sea, and there he came in. And remember, Abraham was a very wealthy man, and he was a powerful warrior. A lot of people think of him as this gentle old guy that had a baby, late in life. But this guy was the real deal. He showed up and people ran. And so when these kings come, so I look at that and I say that's a picture or a type of what's coming down the road, where you've got Abraham who's victorious, and the same thing that's happening when the kings of the east cross the Euphrates River, all right? And John writes this amazing kind of verse, and it's so outlandish, I'm sure, in his day, that even he was shocked. So we know that studies have shown that probably the population of planet Earth in the first century was about 100 million people, which, it's not a lot when you can think about, we're at 8 billion and pushing 9 probably. So, but John wrote this. He said, when the kings of the East come, they will come with an army of 200 million. So now imagine if we said today, I'm going to write an article in our media outlet, and I'm going to say there is assembling an army of 16 billion people that are going to come against Israel in the future. Well, that's so outlandish that it doesn't even make sense, right? But John wrote it, and he said 200 million. Now, what makes it interesting is that Time magazine ran an article in 1963 in the May 21st edition, that China boasted that they had a standing army and militia of 200 million. Now, isn't that interesting that John picked a number that China, the kings of the East, would actually be able to fulfill, and look at how many years ago, that's been 70 years ago. So that's interesting. The other thing that John said when he looked at the army, he said the army came and they were blue and yellow and red in terms of the colors that they brought. Those are all military colors of China. So I really believe that when God gives prophecy, he gives it down to detail, and so that we can understand and put our arms around it.
Wow. And again, more detail in the book, ladies and gentlemen, Midnight in America. The link's in the description. You mentioned Lot as kind of an interesting parallel, and there's a whole section in the book where you talk about the days of Lot and the days of Noah. What's significant about those comparisons that Jesus gave us? He didn't say as it was in the days of Moses. He said Lot and Noah. Why those two?
So when Jesus made reference to those, he really wanted us to go back. If you have an interest in knowing about the future, then you go back and he says, study Lot and study Noah. They're going to give great revelation to your future. So if I go back, let's just start with Noah, because that's a little bit earlier in this scenario that as we're talking about it. So it says in chapter 6 that the sons of God cohabitated with the daughters of men, and from them came forth giants known as the Nephilim. Now, when you read it, you go like, I remember the first time I read it, I go, what's this? This sounds like Greek mythology. You know, God's interacting and marrying and having sex with humans. It's what it sounded like. And you realize that as you study it more, that's exactly what was happening.
Yeah.
In fact, in the book of Jude and the book of 1 Peter and 2 Peter, there's all these references to when angels left their first estate and they were bound. Why? To stop it from happening again. Well, what happened? Well, they gave forth to these giants. I believe some of that DNA carried over somehow, not sure how it did, because we see King David's encountering someone by the name of Goliath. He's a giant in the land. He's 10 feet tall. The average Jew at that time was probably about 5'1". But not only that, but he had 6 feet, 6 toes, and 6 fingers, and they were webbed. Now, I don't know about you, but that seems unusual to me, especially since it's the number 6, especially since the armor of Goliath, if you look at it, it calculates out the height of the spear, the weight of the shield, all comes out to 666. No coincidence in the Word of God. But here's what's even more fascinating. What really was that going on there? That was really transhumanism.
Yes.
That was taking a human being and accentuating its ability, its strength somehow. So we're living in a day of transhumanism where one of the predictions that I just read was within 50 years, if everyone has their way and the Lord tarries, that there won't be any humans on planet Earth that have not been enhanced somehow with transhumanism. And that's because of the competition to keep up or the desire for longevity or whatever other motive you might have. That's a really interesting thing. So transhumanism is something that's going on today. It went on in Noah's day. I'll skip over to the other one, then we can kind of dialogue about the two. So it says, as it was in the days of Lot. So remember, Lot lived in, it says he was the most righteous man in the East. Well, he wasn't the most righteous man on planet Earth. He was the most righteous man in the East, which was Sodom and Gomorrah. The most righteous man in the land at that time was Abraham. He was a contemporary of Lot. And so we see that here he's dwelling. He takes his place in the most ungodly city, and these 2 angels come to rescue Lot and his family out of this. That was a picture of the coming rapture, all right? Yeah. And if you remember, when the angels came in, angels, when they appear in the Bible, they always appear as humans and as men. They don't have wings. The heavenly creatures have wings, but the angels appear as men. And apparently the homosexual crowd was so big within Sodom, when they saw these men, they thought, wow, these are the most incredible men we've ever seen. And so they went to Lot's house demanding that Lot give them over to do unscrupulous things to them, undoubtedly. He refused. Now, this shows you how ungodly Lot was. He had a virgin daughter. He says, take my virgin daughter. Can you imagine that mindset? And the men outside, the homosexuals outside, said, we don't want your daughter, we want the men. So when it finally comes time to get out of Sodom and Gomorrah, what do? They're leaving, and they have to force Lot to leave because he's so in love with the world. This is a picture of a person who's a Christian but so worldly, so carnally minded, they're in love with the world more than they are in love with God. And he said, but don't look back. The angels warned, don't look back. Of course, we know what happened to Lot. She became a pillar of salt and a reminder of, looking back and not keeping your eyes forward on the kingdom of God always has its consequences.
You know, it's interesting. Some have suggested that the city's response, Sodom and Gomorrah's response to those angels, was due to their association with angels, that's what they knew to do with angels. Because of what had happened previously. And it's interesting. And then we get into Daniel chapter 2, verse 43, and it says, speaking of the Antichrist kingdom, that they will mingle their seed with the seed of men, indicating a resurgence of this type of Nephilim hybrid. Do you see that happening in the day and hour we're living in?
Absolutely. I think what we know is frightening enough. Imagine what's going on behind those.
That we don't know.
Yeah, and that's always it. That you can almost deal with what you know because you can fight it.
Yeah.
But all of a sudden, why was a patent for the COVID vaccine established in 2016? I don't know. Maybe they were working on it a few years in advance to kind of drop it on us at the right time. So I think there's always been unscrupulous and difficult challenges that we have to deal with. But remember, God is able. God is bigger than your problem. God is bigger than the situation you find yourself in. And the enemy would want you to cower down in fear or to be alarmed and not realize that the God is sovereign and he knows the end from the beginning. One of my lead professors at Oxford, when I was there, he was double PhD in physics. He was also an Anglican priest. And at one time, he was part of the Royal Air Force Biological Warfare Department. He used to tell me stories about biological warfare. It's like, you got to be kidding me. I had no idea, the things that were going on. And I said to him one day, I said, John, how do you sleep at night? In that classic British style, he said, it's easy, my boy. I believe in a sovereign God. And if your view of God is not big, then everything is going to frighten you, and you're going to be susceptible to the spirit of fear. Remember, it says that God has not given us a spirit of fear. So fear is an emotion, but it's also a demonic spirit. And when you give way or give place to demonic spirits, they absolutely will bring fear or control over you in your life.
Do you feel that spirit is gripping America? I know there's a whole chapter in your book about the spirit of fear. Fear is a sin as well as a spirit. I totally agree with you. Therefore, you can't simply pray for it. You have to repent of it, and you have to cast it out. Do you see this creeping into, in a very tangible way, the American zeitgeist?
Yeah, I don't know if it crept in or if it just rushed like a 100-yard dash. COVID really brought out things that were already in people.
Yes.
And I don't think anyone was, I think everyone was surprised how quickly and how effective this was, how fast people just folded up and gave up rights and fell prey to fear. I was in my car yesterday and I looked over and there was a woman, I couldn't even see her. She had a hat on, she had sunglasses on, and she had this mask that covered not only her entire face but her entire neck. And she was driving alone with her windows up. And I thought, who is she protecting herself from? What's out there? Am I going to get it? No, I'm not going to get it, because fear absolutely captures you. And who is the father of fear? Well, it's Satan himself. If you give way to that, then you are going to be susceptible, and not only just that way, but others. I love the words of Winston Churchill. He's kind of one of my political heroes. He said, courage is the foundational character quality of mankind. Without it, the other character qualities diminish. And so courage is not something you're born with. My dad was a military guy, saw a lot of action. And I said, Dad, the guys that win big medals, were they just courageous men? He said, no, they were average guys. No one ever thought about being a hero. But their character was so strong that when they saw a need, they rushed in and they immediately made a difference in that situation. And I really believe that we need to remind people that courage is a decision you make. It's a decision you make based on the values and the belief systems that you have. And if you don't have courage, you need to re-examine the character qualities in your life, the values that you have, and the faith that you have in God.
Wow. In a moment, I want us to talk a little bit about one of the most startling revelations in your book that I received as I was reading through it, is this 250-year cycle. America is about to celebrate her 250th anniversary, or will she? And you kind of answer that question. So in a moment, we're going to go to the premium section of our website where we do uncensored conversations, because I think there's some things in that part of the conversation that we can't necessarily say online for fear of censorship. But for our premium members, we can talk without any hindrance whatsoever. But for our YouTube audience, I wonder, concerning this book and the challenges we face, what do you think they can do right now? Because they feel hopeless. They see this like the children of Israel when they first saw the Philistine giant. There's the first encounter with supernatural opposition. They see this. They have this revelation of how enormous the opposition is. What do we do with this? How do we break that spirit of fear? And what do we do moving forward?
Well, I really believe if we take David, what did David say? Who is this Philistine dog that defiles the armies of the Most High God? Where did that come from? It came from his relationship. He was the littlest guy in the battlefield, and yet he stood strong. So I think you have to regather yourself. You have to get over this idea of timidity and fear, and lean into God, very much so. Just lean into God and go, look, if the world is as bad as you think it is, okay, then you don't have a shot anyway. So why not stand up and be somebody and make a difference in the world you're in? There's a chapter I really like, and I think people have found a lot of strength in it. It's called America Needs More Blacksmiths.
Yes.
And I use the story of how the Philistines came in and they removed all the blacksmiths from Israel, so they could not make weapons of war, nor could they sharpen their agricultural tools. And when I say America needs more blacksmiths, what I'm really saying is that what are the things that represent our strength, our defense, and our ability to control our agriculture and our economy? And we need to lean into those. So, for example, if you are doing a show like you're doing, you're a blacksmith. You're making it. You're going back into the land. You're standing up for some truth. You're saying this. If you're a parent, you go to a school board meeting and you speak up, you're a blacksmith. You know, if you defend your child with a teacher because they're trying to trick you or not tell you the truth about what's going on in the classroom, then you're a blacksmith. If you get elected to public office, you're a blacksmith. Find a way to make a difference. Not everybody can have a show like yours. Not everybody can be elected to a key office, but everybody can do something. And if you get enough people that are out there doing something, it will make a difference, because we're co-laborers with God. And God has given you ability, gifts, talents. He's given you connections, and use them for the glory of God.
Well, and you're providing them resources to be able to do that. So I want everybody to check out the links in the description and go dive into all of the resources. And again, the book Midnight in America is essential for your library, especially heading into this year. You're going to need it. Now we're going to head on over and talk with our premium members. If you'd like to be a part of that and you're watching today, go to encountertoday.com. First month is only $1. And you get access to all kinds of uncensored content where we can dive into some really meaty subject matter. But I can't recommend this book enough. It's Midnight in America. Pastor Phil, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you. Great to be with you.
If you believe we have crashed craft, stated earlier, do we have the bodies of the pilots who piloted this craft?
As I've stated publicly already in my News Nation interview, biologics came with some of these recoveries. Yeah.
Were they, I guess, human or non-human biologics?
He asked me point blank, have you read your Bible lately? And I said, well, sir, I think I know what it says. And he said, well, then you would know that these things are demonic.
And it turns out that actually, yes, these things have been shot down and crashed, and the U.S. government has the wreckage.
There's just no question that some of the reports seem to tell of the sort of thing that you find in poltergeist phenomena.
I mean, with artificial intelligence, we are summoning the demon.